Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. You're listening to the Startup Selling Show, Talking Sales with Scott Sambucci. That's me. Today's episode is a guest episode, and today's guest is Brett Gilliland. Brett is the founder and CEO of Elite Entrepreneurs. It's a company that specializes in giving $1 million businesses, like $1 million run rate business owners, the knowledges, processes, and tools to grow to 10 million and beyond. Brett himself is an expert in organizational development, leadership strategy. He spent 10 years helping a company called Infusionsoft. Many of you might be familiar with Infusionsoft. If you might be using it or using one of their competitors. Brett joined Infusionsoft when it was about $7 million in revenue and stayed with the company for about 10 years until it was up over $100 million in revenue. So he really understands this journey and all of the pains associated with getting from single digits millions to over 100 million. A lot of the work that Brett does today was actually born out of the work he did at Infusionsoft. We get a lot into the details of that story that began within the company, and Elite Entrepreneurs started within Infusionsoft before it got spun out back in 2018. The reason I wanted to have Brett on the show is because while he and I both have similar missions in helping companies get from startup to ramp up to scale up, a lot of the work that he does is outside of the tech business. And that's exactly the reason I wanted to have him here on the show, because so many of the principles that he's teaching and he's helping his clients to implement every single day are very, very similar to the principles that I'm teaching and helping our clients institute every single day. And what's really interesting and came through in the conversation is that, regardless of whatever type of business you're running, whether it's a tech business SaaS startup or it's a plumbing business, the same challenges that you're having every single day are the same challenges that the entrepreneur in a totally other industry is having. Whether you're trying to grow from your first 100K in revenue to the first million, or you're trying to go from your first million to 3 million, or 3 million to 10 million, doesn't matter if you're a SaaS startup or a plumbing company, you're going to hit the same roadblocks. You're going to have the same struggles, and there's the same toolkit that you can use in order to overcome those struggles. So that's all of the reasons why I wanted to have Brett on the show. So a large part of the conversation that we just had, it was focused on the 5 stages of small business. And so we really broke those down, those 5 stages. We talked about what those mean, like what is the definition of each of those stages, what are the challenges that most entrepreneurs face when they're in that stage, and what are the challenges they face growing out from one stage to the next. And finally, we talked about, for each of those stages, some specific solutions to those challenges, ways to overcome those challenges, so you can get from 100K to 300K, 300K to 1 million, 1 million to 3 million, 3 million to 10 million, and so on. These are the different stages of small business that we dove into. A couple of other topics that we talked about when we first kicked off the conversation, we talked a little bit about culture and setting the vision, because Brett's background is in organizational behavior, organizational leadership. A lot of his contributions to Infusionsoft was based on his expertise in organization development, leadership, and strategy. And as an outgrowth of his work, they were really able to instill a culture that I think a lot of companies would love to have in their company. And so we talked a lot about that in the beginning of the conversation. And then as sort of a sidetrack, as part of those 5 stages of the small business, we did dig deep into some of the challenges when it comes to building a team, growing a team, managing a team. We talked about how we can gift ownership of certain roles and responsibilities to the people around us, to the people that we're bringing on to the team. And we talked about strategies and really specific ways that we can help our team members grow, our team members take over those responsibilities, so that we can ultimately get to a point where we're working on the business as opposed to working in the business. So if any or all of those topics sound interesting to you, then you definitely want to listen to the rest of the episode. Before we do that, I wanted to give you a quick offer to help you grow and ramp up your startup. So recently, I just published a book called Stop Hustling, Start Scaling, very appropriate to today's conversation with Brett. The subtitle is Ramp Up Your B2B Startups, Repeatable Revenue with the Q Framework. So this book, Stop Hustling, Start Scaling, will walk you through the Q framework. It's a framework that I developed over the course of 25 years of selling to enterprises and working with 3 different startups. And ultimately, it's about how do we get repeatability in your sales process today so that you can get scalability down the road. And I'd love for you to grab a copy of this book. The best way for you to get your own personal copy is to simply go over to my website, salesqualia, QUALIA.com. And right from the homepage, you'll see a button that says Start Reading Now. The coolest part about this is you don't even have to buy it. All you have to do is click to download it. You can download the entire PDF version of the book, Stop Hustling, Start Scaling, and you can get to work reading that right away. Of course, if you want to buy a copy on Amazon or the Kindle version, there's both hard copy, paperback, and Kindle. Go to Amazon, grab a copy. But most importantly, I want to make sure to help you as you're ramping up and scaling up your startup. And this book is one of the ways that I'd like to be able to do that. So without any further ado, let's head over to my conversation with Brett Gilliland. Brett, welcome to the program. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Scott. Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to spending some time with you.
Yeah, same here. I've got a number of different topics. I was like, one of the hardest parts about prepping for this conversation with you is trying to figure out like, how am I going to fit all of the different topics and questions into the time that we have? So we'll do the best we can in the time we have. And I've already done a bit of an intro about you and your company and some of the topics that we're going to be talking about today. I'd love to hear from you. Like, one of the questions I'd love to ask people is like, look, you're running this company, Elite Entrepreneurs. What does that mean? What do you do? And people say, hey, Brett, what do you do? How do you describe that?
Yeah. So thanks for the opportunity to share. My answer to that question is I get to help 7-figure business owners scale their business. And there's nothing I love more than to do that. Most of the time, businesses get stuck as they're growing somewhere between 1 and 3 million in revenue. And that entrepreneurs used to like throwing it on his or her back. They're taking the mountain by sheer force, usually. And they have a lot of force. Like, these are superhuman entrepreneurs. And then they have a team starting to form. And all of a sudden, they hit this invisible growth ceiling. And they're not sure why. And it just feels like work now. This thing they were grinding it out, but it's not happening. And they're tapped out. They're frustrated. They think everybody on the team should be thinking and acting like owners, but they're not. Everybody's looking to them for answers. Anyway, it gets frustrating. And so we just found that there are very predictable things that happen in this 7-figure growth journey. And we know what it looks like, sounds like, tastes like, and we just know it inside and out. So we get to help 7-figure business owners figure out how to scale their business, and it's super fun.
Yeah, and so you've got quite a background in doing this because you spent 10 years at Infusionsoft. I wanted to maybe start a little bit there and then work into where you are now with Elite Entrepreneurs, because in reading your bio and from what I know about you, you started with Infusionsoft. Initially, you were a strategic advisor to the CEO, and then you moved into a VP role. Is that right?
Yeah. So actually, before I even started working at Infusionsoft, I was a consultant for Infusionsoft. So yeah, the CEO there, Clate Mask, spoke at an event. I heard him speak back in 2007, and I was like, I can help these guys scale effectively, intentionally, have a great company. And they already had the makings of a great company, but I just could see there was a good fit for what I do. And we connected first as a consultant, and I helped them for about, 8 or 9 months as a consultant. And then we knew it was just sort of meant to be. And actually, my first role title at Infusionsoft was the Built to Last Champion. And we took that from Jim Collins' book, Built to Last. But our intent was, we will be a great, enduring company. We're going to create a great culture. We're going to do this thing. So I was the Built to Last champion. And then later, I took a role as the strategic advisor to the CEO, which you mentioned, and then the VP of Leadership Development later. But anyway, a variety of roles. We mostly made up titles, but the focus of it was, how do we create a great, enduring company? And my expertise is in organization development. So it's all about, how do you take a complex system in an organization and have all the parts working together optimally to get the results that you want? And it was just a lot of fun to do that at Infusionsoft for those 10 years. And we grew it from, when I started, we were in the 7-figure range, and then we grew to 10 million, and then to 30 million, and then 100 million. And there's a specific reason that we'll talk about later why I chose the 10 and the 30 and the 100. But those are different stages in a small business growth evolution. And we went through all those. So, yep, that was a great time.
And so after the run at Infusionsoft, talk about the transition out of Infusionsoft to what you're doing now with Elite Entrepreneurs.
Thanks for
what was the catalyst for that?
So I'd still be at Infusionsoft if it weren't for the Elite Entrepreneurs business. But one of the things Clate and I did together at Infusionsoft was create this business. We called it the Elite Forum. We had our first one in December 2011. So for any of your listeners who aren't familiar with Infusionsoft, it's small business CRM, marketing automation, sales automation, right? So we were serving thousands of small businesses and later tens of thousands of small businesses, and they saw the success we were having scaling our business effectively. And we had an award-winning culture, and we were growing like crazy, and all these great things were happening. And our customers were saying, we love your software. It's helping us with our sales and marketing automation, but can you teach us how to do what you're doing with the business, how to grow a company? And at first, Clate would say, no, we're not going to do that. We're a software company. We're not a training company. But in December 2011, we were facing a revenue shortfall, one of those great stories that you go back to and go, we're not going to hit the goal. What do we do? Actually, Clate got up in front of the whole company and he said, I can't see a way. I've looked at many, many ways to hit the goal. I can't see it. I just don't want any of you going out and spending a year-end bonus prematurely. And so after that meeting, which was like late November, some of our key employees got together and said, no way, we're going to hit the goal. And out of that time of, it wasn't like existential crisis, but it was like, we're not going to hit the goal. What are we going to do? Was born a couple of unique, very creative service offerings, but they were one-time service offerings. And one of them was what we called Elite Forum. And we basically put together our playbook for scaling a 7-figure business. How do you grow effectively? How do you make that transition from entrepreneur to CEO, where you can set a powerful vision, align the team, and then marry that with a meeting rhythm, a planning and execution cadence that allows you to go make big things happen. Anyway, we shared it with our customers that December 2011. We hit the goal, by the way. There was much rejoicing, right? Everybody was happy. Got our year-end bonus. And so Elite Forum was born, and we grew it inside the business for 6 years before one day in a strategic planning meeting for I guess it was the calendar year 2018, we said, you know what? We're a software company. It's time to stop doing some of these other things. And I fully realized that was the best decision for Infusionsoft, now Keep, but having been one of the creators of that business and I was leading its growth inside of the company, I just had a lot of passion for it. So we figured out some terms. I bought it. We spun it out in February of last year, and I've been running it independent since then.
Okay. So that's a really great sort of backstory, because obviously I want to get more into some of the stages of, the business growth that you see, and, how do you avoid burnout, all of the stuff that goes with running a company. There's like a couple of really important lessons here, just from the growth of Infusionsoft. Like, so when you came in, it was a 7-figure business. You grew it up to 100 million. And just that moment of the team deciding like, no, we're on board with making this number. We're not going to just sit around and do nothing about it. That had to be reflective of the kind of culture that you guys built at that company. It's not like a random occurrence, because there's plenty of companies that miss goal. And for the people, like the listeners of this podcast, most of them run tech companies or, tech startups, and they're always struggling with like, how do I create this culture, people around me that care about the business as much as I care about the business. I was on the phone with the CEO this morning. He's like, I can't get them to understand why they need to respond to a lead in 10 minutes instead of the next day. Like, they don't understand. Like, you got to get back to this guy. And he said, it's really hard to get that passion and that drive out to the rest of the culture. So I'm curious, like, as you were growing this business, what were some of the things specifically that you can think of that really helped you create this? I mean, it's such a trite term to create a culture, but it really is oftentimes the difference between going from 7 to 8 and then eventually 9 figures as a business.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Scott. And very, very astute observations, by the way, because I didn't lead any of that thought process. You just heard the story and hit the nail right on the head. The culture that we had created was so powerful that here we had the leader, right? Not just a leader, but the leader of the company saying, it's not going to happen. I don't see a way. Like basically, we're going in for a hard landing, right? Buckle up, people. And then we had people telling him, no way, not, like we will find a way. And you don't get that just anywhere. So there are a couple keys. And by the way, this is what we teach in our elite programs because it works. It works really well. So the very first thing you do is you get super clear about why you're doing what you're doing, who you are. So we call it setting the vision. You do this vision setting work. And when we say vision, it's not this generic vision statement. In fact, there isn't a vision statement. Vision for us is made up of 3 parts: purpose, values, and mission. And if you're a Simon Sinek fan, you've heard him, or even if you're not a fan, you've heard his TED Talk start with why. That's what I just went through, right? The why is the purpose. It's why we exist. Why we love getting up out of bed every day to come do this, why Monday morning is not a dread, but like we're excited to go and engage again. The values are how we operate. It's anchored into some of our core beliefs of the world and our part in it. And then the mission is a very specific destination that we're up to next. So in the next, 3 years, here's where we're going to be together as a company. And a really key part, Scott, in your question, how do you get people to do that? Is you enroll them in the process of creating these things in the first place. So to the CEO you talked to earlier today, I would say, make sure that you bring them along in thinking through your purpose and your values and your mission and creating those. And when they get involved in a co-creative process, it's part of theirs now, right? It's the very reason why I couldn't stand to see the elite business just go off to somebody else or get shut down altogether, because I helped create it. And so I wanted to take that thing and run with it and make sure that it still had legs. So co-creation is a powerful thing. Most leaders either underappreciate it or really don't know how to make that happen in their teams.
All right, folks, we are off and running in my conversation with Brett Gilliland. Listen, I want to say thank you for listening to the Startup Selling Show. This is now in my 4th year of doing this podcast. It started off way back when podcasts were sort of like just getting onto the map, so to speak. And obviously, podcast has grown exponentially in those 4 years. And in those 4 years, we've done about 100 episodes. And we've now done a better job of getting the content out there, not just on Apple Podcasts, but on places like Stitcher and Spotify and SoundCloud or wherever you might be listening to this podcast. And I wanted to just simply say thank you for listening to this show. If you're a subscriber to the show, thanks for subscribing. If this is your first time, I hope you're enjoying the content that we're delivering so far. Definitely go back and listen to some of the other episodes. I think you'll also find those valuable. One of the ways that helps us get the word out about this podcast is, number one, if you would leave a review on any of those platforms where you're listening to the show, Stitcher, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever, just so that other people can hear from people just like you about why they should be listening to the show. And number two, if you would tell a friend or 10 about the show. So if you're digging this episode, if there's another episode that you really enjoyed, share it with a friend. Say, hey, I heard this episode. I think you might like it. Check it out. You're going to really like this podcast. Viral is still the best way to get the word out and how to continue to grow the listenership here on the Startup Selling Show. Nothing jazzes me more than seeing the numbers go up every single month in terms of people listening, subscribers, downloads, all that good stuff. And it really keeps us motivated to keep bringing really great content to you. So thanks again for listening. I hope you're enjoying it. And let's get back to my conversation with Brett. Is there anything specifically, like I always try to imagine if I'm listening to this advice and saying, okay, great, I got to co-create this. I've got to have purpose. I've got to have values. I have to have mission. I got to get the team enrolled in this process. Okay, but like, how do I do that? Because I'm running this company. I'm trying to raise capital. I'm trying to get the next deal done. I'm trying to manage the engineering team. The product has gone haywire. We're 2 weeks behind on the sprint. And meanwhile, you're asking me to like carve out this time.
Yeah, take time, slow down to do this stuff.
Yeah.
So The piece that we marry so what I just shared with you is the get intentional piece. Like you got to get super intentional. The other piece is the get disciplined piece. And that's where a meeting rhythm or a heartbeat, if you will, of the company has to come into place. And that cadence it's several meetings, right? There are weekly meetings, monthly meetings, quarterly, annual, but the pivotal one in all of it, if you're just getting started on this, is a quarterly planning meeting. And so I know it's hard and everybody's got to deal with the same challenge of making time to do this stuff. But if you can even just break off one day in the quarter to get out of the business with your key people that need to be involved in this co-creative process, it will make a difference. It will make a world of difference in the intentionality, the coordinated action that the team will be able to take after spending time together on that goes up. You have a lot less waste or wobble in the company when everybody knows exactly what we're up to. They know what success looks like. They know their part in it. So it does take time to do some of this very intentional work, but it pays off pretty quickly.
So I think I know we could probably talk for hours just about culture and some of that, but I do want to transition into the stages of the small business. I want to talk about, you wrote you've got a number of blog posts and articles on LinkedIn on your company blog that I was reading. One of them in particular I really liked was the 5 mindsets that an entrepreneur should have to grow to an 8-figure business. You talked earlier about these sort of constraints, like you get to $1 million or 2 or 3, and it doesn't matter really what the business is, whether it's a software as a service tech business, or it's somebody who has, a couple of dry cleaners installations that they're running in their local town, right? Everyone talks about breaking through that ceiling, the $1, $2, $3 million ceiling. Well, first let's talk about those 5 stages of the small business, and then I want to talk through those barriers that people hit the ceilings, because you mentioned like going from 1 to 3 million, 3 to 10, 10 to 30, 30 to 100. And I think I know why you mentioned those numbers specifically. So maybe in this, we can sort of talk about those 5 stages and then come back and talk about the barriers or the constraints that people tend to hit and the reason they don't get to that next level.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. And for those listening, I'm going to do my best to describe those stages without the benefit of a visual aid. We actually have a visual aid that I'd be happy to tell people how they can get their own copy of it when the time is right in our interview here. But let me go ahead and share the idea. So this is, I wish I could claim this is my original work. It is not. It's not my genius. I'm really good at finding genius and really good at implementing well. So I'm like the ultimate curator of great ideas. And then I've created some things that have enabled us to make these ideas work in our business. But this is called the stages of small business. We call it the stages of small business growth. And the original work on this is done by Clate Mask, who's the CEO now of Keep, which is formerly Infusionsoft. They rebranded. But the 5 stages that you mentioned take a business from startup to 10 million in revenue. And then sort of as we alluded to earlier, the stages continue on from there, but we only talk about these ones from 0 to 10 million. So the first stage is one we're all familiar with. Most people call it Solopreneur, right? It's the one-man show, or the one-person show, I should say, for all your female entrepreneurs in the audience. We have the opportunity to go and create something, right? So the entrepreneur says, I'm going to go create something. And at first they may do it as a side hustle, the side gig. And that usually lasts till, maybe $4,000 in monthly pay before they can feel good enough or safe enough to jump away from the day job and do this full time. But at some point they become self-employed. And so that solopreneur stage goes from 0 to 100,000 in revenue, in annual revenue or annual sales. The second stage takes it from 100,000 to 300,000. And I'm just going to pause and talk about this law of the 1s and 3s of revenue that we've found. So at every 1 and 3 of revenue is the stage change. So at 100,000, you move into stage 2. At 300,000, you move into stage 3. At $1 million, stage 4. 3 million, stage 5. 10 million, and so forth. So in these ones of threes of revenue, we've just seen it bear out. Like you said, it doesn't matter the business. Everybody who has a business goes through these similar challenges, and their business model may cause these stages to be a little bit different in like exactly where they hit, but it's pretty darn close for most businesses. In fact, it's so eerily similar for businesses that almost without exception, people who look at this visual that I'm going to share later, they kind of say, how did you know, right? Like this is like a "you are here" map. Yeah. So the ones and threes, every time you triple basically in revenue size, the current, and I'm gonna try to emphasize this for your listeners, the current people, processes, and systems are insufficient to get you to the next stage. Okay. So think about that. 100,000 in revenue, solopreneur. The current people, processes, and systems are insufficient to get you to 300,000, which we would all probably go, yeah, that's probably true. I need to hire, I need a couple people to help me get there. And so you start to establish a team, and we call that stage the new employer team, from new employer stage, from 100,000 to 300,000. Then they've got a little team, and they push that revenue up to 300,000. And they move into stage 3, which we call a steady operation. Now they've got maybe 4 to 10 employees, and they're moving from 300,000 to $1 million. They're in that range. But the people, processes, and systems at 300,000 are insufficient to scale that business to $1 million. And so they've got to develop some things during that stage if they want to make it to the $1 million mark, and so on and so forth. So roughly, every time you triple a business in size, you need to level up some combination, the right combination of your people, processes, and systems to enable that next leg of growth. So let me just pause right there. And Scott, maybe you can help me pull out the right lessons for your audience on that.
Oh, so many here. So I've heard a version of this called the rule of 3 and 10. It was explained to me. I heard it first from an interview with Phil Libin, who started Evernote. I heard it I think he was on Tim Ferriss's podcast, and he talked about this rule of 3 to 10, and he had attributed to Hiroshi Mikitani, who was the founder of Rakuten. And this idea of like when your business grows by magnitudes of 3 and 10, everything breaks. So 100,000 to 300,000, 300,000 to $1 million, $1 million to 3, 3 to 10, these systems break. And as you said, when I first heard this expressed for the very first time, I immediately went back to my 3 startups and thought about our growth in terms of revenue and people, even not just revenue, but the number of people on the team. We went from 3 people to roughly 10. Everything broke. From 10 people to 30, everything broke. From 30 to 100, everything broke. And it was the most frustrating experience at the time. But then once I heard it, I was like, oh, now it all makes sense. That was just a necessary dip that we had to go through and emerge out the other side with new systems, people, processes like you're describing. So this is absolutely a universal law, heard before. And so that's sort of one key takeaway. The second thing for me is thinking about this, the startup world that we live in. Typically I think of there's kind of 3 distinct phases of growth. There's startup, ramp up, scale up. So startup is like getting your first customers, your first revenue, which is going everything from solopreneur to new employer. It's the first couple $100,000 in revenue. Then you get into this ramp up phase, which is like, okay, now we got to get to like $1 million in revenue, because if we get to $1 million in revenue, then we can close a Series A round funding.
Right.
So that's kind of like the next phase. And like, okay, cool, we got the Series A at roughly $1 million. Then the scale up is like, we want to go from 1 to 10 and really 10x this thing. And then after 10, you just, go to 30 and then 100. And so this, these stages of the small business that you described also work really well in the startup world, just like they do with the entrepreneurs that you help.
Absolutely. And, because we were a software startup, our experience is very similar to the one that you had. It sounds like multiple times. So either congratulations or, my condolences for going through that. I don't know which, but you're one of those hardy entrepreneurs who just keeps going at it. But you'll notice you have the benefit of seeing the infographic, but down along the bottom, the very bottom of this infographic, we didn't use the exact same words that you did to describe it, but we call it start, run, and scale. those three distinct sort of phases, and the stages fit on top of those. But your experience is right on the money. I mean, again, I don't know that we made up any of this. This is just our version of describing what is, right? It's kind of laws of physics.
They're universal laws. It's like, you don't have to make up gravity, but you can explain it different ways.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and I think you wanted to get into some of the major hurdles at each stage. And so if you're ready, we can move to those.
Yeah. So I think the solopreneur hurdle, like you said, going from like side job or side gig or whatever to self-employed, I think, most of us, I can remember, I had a side coaching business. I was doing workshops and I had some one-on-one coaching clients kind of on the side while I was working at different companies. And I remember getting to a point in my career where I was like, okay, I'm done with the startup thing. I'm in my 40s, got a wife and kid at home. Like, I'm done traveling and living in hotels. I remember that jump that we had to make. Like, financially, I was getting some money on as a side gig and kind of putting it in the bank, and I kind of was building up a cash reserve. And I had to take a part-time adjunct teaching gig to also fill in, just to like manufacture enough to pay the mortgage, right?
Right.
And the very first day, like my wife and I, we talked about this for a year. From the time I was like, I want to do this full time. It took almost a year to get to the point where I was on my first day. I remember it was October the 1st on 2015. And I'm sitting at the kitchen table at 9 a.m. working on my laptop. She had just dropped my son off at daycare. She had come back and she's looking at me at the table working. And you have 8 kids, right? And a wife, like, that something's going on there, right?
Family life. And
yeah. And I could tell something's going on. I'm like, what's up? And she's like, she just blurted out, what if it doesn't work? like what doesn't work? Like, the company, I'm like, we just spent 10 months getting to the point where I'm here. Like, it's my first day, give me some time. But that's very real, like making that jump. And that's even your infographic here is like this chasm where, like, quit your day job. It's like, it's easy to run something on the side, but once you take that jump, man, it's really hard to jump back.
Yeah. There's no really good way to depict the scariness of that moment for a lot of people. Even though the representative chasm is on the infographic, it's a big deal. And especially for people who, like in your situation, it's not like you were right out of college or early on and the risk was low. You were almost 20 years into a career, and you guys had some stability and a certain lifestyle, and you've got a family, and that leap, that's a big leap. It's a big deal. So
yeah,
a lot of people make that leap, but it's not many people make it to the point where, right? So congrats on making it.
I appreciate that. And I think most of the people, obviously people you work with and the people I work with, we're well past that stage. I think it's important to always give it its due credit. So let's talk about the next kind of movements from solopreneur to like new employer. You mentioned, getting to, from roughly 100K to 300K in revenue. You're starting to, whether it's some part-time help or maybe you've already paid, if you're a software person, you found a developer overseas to help you out with some stuff, or
it could be contractors, it could be somebody you outsource to, vendors, whatever. It's just, it represents there's a team starting to form. There are more than just you to wear all the hats. So you're starting to give some of the responsibility to others. And the key thing at this stage is figuring out how to sell. Like, you had to do enough of that as a self-employed person, but the biggest hurdle as a self-employed person is leads. Like, where am I going to find my next meal, right? Like, I got to kill whatever I eat, and I got to go find that, right? So leads is a big deal as a solopreneur. As a new employer, I don't know if the word systematize comes in here or not, but you've got to figure out sales on a consistent basis. And I think what you're doing for people really, really helps in that category. And then what I want to point out here is that once you quote unquote figured out sales in this case, doesn't mean it's less important in future stages. It just means it's the biggest hurdle at this stage.
Mm-hmm. getting those first, whatever, if it's enterprise software, it's getting your first 10 customers, your first 5 paying customers, even if they're way underpriced relative to the value you're creating or the price you want to charge down the road. You're just trying to get more revenue in the door. And so what do you see both in this transition from solopreneur to new employer, right? You go from 100 to 300, and then also that next going from 300 to $1 million. What are some of the key barriers, or what are the constraints that prevent that startup or that entrepreneur from kind of breaking out of that zone?
Yeah. So one of the biggest things is the investment mindset, right? Especially when you're coming from the bootstrapped point of view and, being very capital needy, let's say. You don't have money unless you sell. So got to sell, you start to get some money, and it's really hard to start investing in people that cost more than like a part-time helper, right? Or overseas developer, or, all the creative ways we try to save money. And I'm not saying we need to stop being creative in ways to save money, but I am saying you have to start thinking more like an investor at that point and say, okay, if I invest in this key role, might be my first 6-figure salary that I'm going to pay to somebody else. What kind of return can I expect, and how soon could I get it? So it's really about thinking, how can I invest to grow, especially as it relates to people? And then how do I organize work effectively and give them real responsibility so that I'm not becoming the bottleneck in micromanaging, right? Because you've done everything to this point, and all of a sudden you got to give it up to somebody else, but you know exactly what works and what doesn't work. And so you have a hard time doing that.
Yeah, I'd really love to talk about that a bit more. So you use this phrase, organize the work. And I'm sure you've seen this as well, where, okay, even if I get comfortable, I think of myself as an investor, I want to pay 50 or 100K in a salary. I want to get this investment back and hopefully big returns, 10X, 100X ROI on that person I hire. It seems like a lot of entrepreneurs, when they start, it's one thing if you're managing like an Upwork person or developer overseas that's contractor, but now you've got like a real team of real employers. And sometimes you're hiring for roles that you're not familiar with. If you're an engineer by trade and now you're hiring a salesperson, or you're a product person and you're trying to hire a salesperson, it's really hard to do that. And then you assume, okay, even if let's say I've successfully hired somebody, it doesn't mean that I know how to manage that person. And that's where I tuned into that phrase, organize the work. What are some of the mistakes that you see entrepreneurs make when they're making those hires, particularly on the sales side, when there's not, like, whether it's not organizing the work properly or not? You're laughing because you're probably like, we don't have enough time for all the mistakes.
Well, we don't have enough time, but we have enough time for this. And I'm laughing because I think you'll be able to relate. As an entrepreneur who's super busy, still trying to, manage time, which was the biggest hurdle when it was the side job, is like, how am I going to manage my time effectively to get this thing growing? Anyway, time is always a thing. And you need to hire that salesperson. So let's take the example you gave of they're a product person or an engineer, and they're going to hire the salesperson. So what do we do to save time on that job posting? How do we put the job together in the first place? We go to some
probably just copy and paste.
We go to Indeed, or, back in the day it was Monster or whatever. We go to some job board and we say, we type in sales rep or account executive, or we type in a few sample titles. We pull up these descriptions that somebody else put together and we say, that looks good. That looks good. That looks good. We piece it together, and all of a sudden we present Frankenstein. Here's the job as a Frankenstein to the world, and say, now I've organized work. No entrepreneur uses that phrase, organize the work, right? That's an organization development geek speaking. But they think they're hiring somebody to take a chunk of work off their plate, and they're expecting results. But they don't ever get clear themselves about exactly what they're handing off. And they say, well, of course I'm handing off sales. Like, I want sales. But there's so much, there's different paths to get those sales. There's different ways you could measure their success. And we just want the person to know automatically how to get it done and produce great results. So again, we could talk about this forever, but that's the common mistake, is just say, here's the Frankenstein job description, and I'm crossing my fingers that job's going to get done.
Yeah, I absolutely love this Frankenstein job posting because I know CEOs that do it because you think you're saving time. And so now that we've introduced this as a problem or a constraint, what should somebody do to avoid the situation? Because like, it's one thing if you just don't find somebody to hire, that's kind of a problem because it slows down your growth and you're still running around on sales while you're trying to do other stuff. I think the even worse problem is when you hire somebody, particularly if it's an enterprise B2B situation, and 6 months later, you realize like, holy crap, I've been spending $10,000 a month fully loaded on comp and everything else, and I got no sales.
Right. And
like,
it's going to take at least another 6 months.
Investment. Yeah.
Yeah, it's horrible. So what do they do? So here's what we all should do. We all need to get really, really clear on exactly what we want out of the role. In essence, we're taking some burden off of our own shoulders, a chunk of it. We're saying, I'm willing to part ways with my payroll dollars, right? My investment every pay period, every 2 weeks, in exchange for somebody to take this responsibility from me and own it. I want them to own it. So the other mistake we make in those job descriptions is we say, here are the qualifications and here are the responsibilities. And there's a bulleted list of like 20 things, right? We say responsible for, A to Z. And that's it. And then we put the person in the seat, when they show up and say, you're going to be awesome. I just know it. Good luck. Right. And they really don't know what the measurement of success for their role is most of the time. So what we have to do is get clear for ourselves, what's the responsibility I'm breaking off and gifting ownership. I'm not gifting, I'm giving ownership to somebody in exchange for payroll every 2 weeks. That value exchange needs to be clearly stated. And so we need to be clear about what's expected, how it will be measured, and how it aligns to company goals. Because if that person knows exactly what's expected and how it will be measured and how it aligns to company goals, then they can own it. And I recommend, we have a concept we call Big Three. I recommend boiling down the ocean of responsibilities from 18 or 20 bullets down to 3. These are the key 3 responsibilities. Now, is it fair to say, here are the types of work you'll be doing, right? Bullet, 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 sure. But at the end of the day, you're going to be responsible for, number of units or number of dials or talk time. It's some combination of results and activities, key activities or key results that mean they have owned the piece of work that I gave to them in exchange for payroll every 2 weeks.
Yeah, you said giving ownership. I almost like the term gifting ownership because, like, if you found the right person that really loves to do that work, and in a lot of cases, the sales is sort of, for many entrepreneurs, it's like a necessary evil. I got to grind out, brute force, get my first 100K, 300K, million in revenue, but then I got to get somebody else to do this. If you've got the right person that's excited for the job, going all the way back to your purpose, values, mission, if you got if you found the right candidate that looks at your purpose, values, mission and says like, oh my God, this company is awesome. I love the product. I love the market. I love the customers. You're actually going to gift me ownership of growing sales. They should almost want to feel like it is a gift. Like, go home and say, I can't believe I got this job. Yeah. And tell their friends how awesome it is. It is a gift.
You are absolutely right. And the reason I retracted it is because of the value exchange. I was making the point of in exchange for this payroll, but we talked about the importance of setting the vision early on in the call. Then the next part is actually more important if you want this culture to actually exist in your company. It's to hire, lead, and fire to that vision, right? So you're spot on. You want to hire people. And by the way, when you get clear on purpose, values, mission, and that language starts to make its way into a well-written job description that has a ton of clarity, you're going to get people who are excited, who are going to feel like that's a gift, just like you said. So everything starts to be this really virtuous cycle up when you take the time to do this work right. And anyway, sorry if we got sidetracked, but you're right. It should be a gift for the right person. And most of the time, we're looking for the fastest path to getting somebody in the door. And it just creates a lot of pain down the road if we don't do it right.
And how do you, when you're working with people in your program, like, how do you coach that entrepreneur that says like, I just need somebody to take over sales. I know this person isn't perfect, but I just can't afford, or I don't want to do sales anymore. I don't have the time. I'm way overloaded. I'm burning out. How do you get them to really conscientiously say, I know all of this sucks, but I have to say no to this candidate. Maybe it's going to take 3 more months to find the perfect person who sees this as a gift. Because I know that's a struggle that, teams that we coach all the time. I'm trying to warn people, like, don't do this. And it sounds like not the right person. Don't do the hire. And then 6 months later, like, this person was a terrible hire. I'm like, I told you.
Yeah.
How
I don't know that I have
coach people, or how do you get an entrepreneur that's in that situation to say, all right, I got to have this meta awareness and I'm about to make a mistake.
So, on a podcast, we don't have the benefit of visual, but let me at least try to paint a picture that I always try to start with this picture when we do the hiring discussion. I ask them about what's the cost of a mishire? We start kind of innocently, right? What's the cost of a mishire? And they'll start to throw out some numbers. If they're brutally honest, they'll give a heavy number. Like, it's costly to hire the wrong person. And we talk about all the reasons why, the direct costs, the indirect costs. We say, here's the cost. And if you Google this stuff, there are different numbers out there, but 1 to 3 times annual salary is kind of an average answer from all the quote unquote experts out there. Like it's expensive, depending on the level of the role and non-exempt, et cetera, but it's expensive. So I put an image of a pile of cash burning up in flames on the screen. We talk about this expense. It is costly to get the wrong person in there. We talk about what it does to your culture, what it does to your customer experience, which is causing a lot of pain and money. It's cost everywhere you look at it. And then recently I had somebody tell me this as the most expensive mishire. And I get figures like $250,000, $500,000 this mishire cost me, and big numbers. But one guy said this, and this was in the last few months, I'd never heard this. He said, it cost me 5 years of my life to get the wrong hire. And you just think about that. It's kind of sobering. The impact that it has to the entrepreneur personally when there's a mishire, it's huge. So I understand the urgency. I need somebody in here now, and it looks like they can do it. But when you get it wrong, it is so expensive. And when you get it right, it's so amazingly great, like the opposite. So we start out with the cost of a mishire and just really try to drive that home. And we tell them more times than not, when they come through our program, they're going to end up probably letting go of some people. It's going to be painful. At least one team member they're going to let go because they don't fit anymore with this now articulated purpose, values, and mission. And if you want to go to the next place, you got to have the right people, processes, and systems to get there. So we just start out saying, look, sometimes you're going to have to fire people or not hire ones that you want to hire in the first place. And I don't know if that helped, but I feel kind of passionate about it.
Yeah, it does help. And the firing piece is something that's hard because, whether you're an entrepreneur, running a business operation, or you're a startup, right? Like that initial team may have been there during the toughest times.
Right.
And you have a certain, I've had people, the words that come out of the CEO's mouth is like, I just feel so much loyalty to this person. And great, I understand that from a human aspect, but if that person is not equipped, they don't have the skills, they don't match the culture of where things are going, they don't have the abilities, then you owe it. I almost, the way I describe it to people is like, you owe it to the company. Like, the company is now its own living, breathing organism that needs to grow. It needs to be nurtured. And if you've got this dead weight, or somebody's suboptimal or not performing, you owe it to the company to get rid of them. And frankly, most people, in my experience, I've had to fire people, and they all knew it was coming.
Yeah.
And they're almost there's most of the people I've ever fired, I'm actually still friends with them.
Well, then you're doing it right.
They've all done better things.
Yeah.
They've all gone on to bigger and better things.
So on the firing thing, just to tie it back to the stages we were talking about, unfortunately, the people who are able to get you, let's say, from 300,000 to $1 million, even to 3 million, they probably don't know what it takes to go from 3 to 10 million. Even if they were exceptional at getting you to 3 million, and you feel all this loyalty. When we talk about foxhole moments, right? Like, they were in the trenches with me. We almost died in battle. We were in the foxhole together. I'm extremely loyal to them. Okay, so you're not loyal to any of your other team members. Oh, well, no, I care about them too. Well, you're hurting them, right? Like this person isn't able to help you get where you need to go. And everybody else associated with your business is suffering. Customers, partners, employees. So, and it's painful. It is so hard. It's one of the worst things you have to do as an entrepreneur. But if you do it right and do it the way it sounds like you have, Scott, they're going to see that it's actually better for them to be in a place where they can thrive because they're not thriving. It's stressful for them to get up and go to work and try to battle it out when they're not succeeding. And it just like they need to move on, even if they're not ready to do it on their own.
Yeah, I had, I forget who it was. It might have been Phil Libin. I don't want to attribute it to him if it wasn't him, but I think he was telling a story of somebody who, like, as an engineer, they had to fire him. And when they told him, the response was, "What took you so long?" Like the person getting fired said that. And it was just like, they knew it was coming, right?
And even if the person doesn't feel that way, you will get that response from team members. What took you so long? Like everybody knows.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, everybody else is going to be better off. Like they're going to actually be able to see that you care enough about this company to make hard decisions, and they'll be more committed. So it's hard, but it always turns out better when you go ahead and do it.
Yeah. Well, let's go into that next phase you're talking about from, say, 3 to 10, just to kind of round out these five stages in the journey here. Because you talked about, in your infographic, you talked about multiple teams and leaders, management team. So now I've gone from 1 million to 3, or even 3 to 10. Now I'm managing multiple teams, or I'm managing managers.
Right.
That seems like, I know that from experience, that's a big constraint. So maybe there's others, but maybe take a couple minutes to talk about that.
So let me take a minute to say the reason our company's name is called Elite Entrepreneurs is because we consider the ones to make it to 1 million in revenue the elite ones. And there's a reason for that. Again, depending on the stats, who you believe has the right answer, it's somewhere between only 3 to 5% of businesses that ever start make it to 1 million in revenue. Okay, that's kind of sobering, right? Especially, I don't know how many of your listeners are sub 1 million in revenue, but only 3 to 5% of businesses that ever start make it to 1 million in revenue. That's why we call them elite. Now they're elite entrepreneurs, and all of a sudden they're like, this isn't any fun. It's hard. The team's bigger. I have more work for me. I'm probably making less than I was back at 500,000 or 300,000. And I don't know how to move this forward. So people and systems becomes super critical to go from 1 to 3 million. And then from 3 to 10 million, you continue on that theme of people and systems. And it's all about leadership and culture. And that doesn't mean marketing stopped being important or sales. All of that stuff is still super important, but you will not scale unless you figure out how to make this transition from entrepreneur to CEO. And even if you don't like to call yourself CEO, like you think that's, some strange title that we give ourselves, you're still a leader of leaders. You still have to figure out how to set direction, set a vision, and align a bunch of people, the growing team. And now, now you've hired leaders that you didn't know before, and they're hiring people they didn't know before. And all of a sudden, the ability to keep everybody with a consistent culture and an aligned set of work towards common goals, it just becomes more and more challenging. So you have to put a bunch of people, process, and systems in place to enable that kind of growth. And you have to change as a leader. You have to become a leader of leaders.
And I've seen different roles that get assigned, whether it's like chief of staff or operations manager or COO. Is there a point where, as a CEO, I should be handing off some of the management of these systems and processes, or should I still be trying to own that? Does it depend on the executive? Because being an operator is different than sometimes you're running a company.
Yeah, really great question. That's especially, I think it's important. It begins to be important in the 1 to 3 million growth journey, but it's pivotal in the 3 to 10 that you really start to form a capable leadership team. Without it, you just can't lead it all. Man, I wish we had a ton more time, but there's a guy that I work with. His name is Dan Ralphs. He's awesome. But Dan likes to talk about sort of I think it's a Chinese proverb, but basically it goes something like this. When is the best time to plant a shade tree? Right? Well, 20 years ago is the answer, right? There's a similar thing that happens in leadership development. When's the best time to develop a leader? It was before you needed one. And unfortunately, it takes some time. So if you want your really valuable people that have been with you from the start, you're really loyal to them, if you want them to be able to stay with your company in key roles, you've got to be in the business of developing leaders, like starting yesterday, like now. And if you don't develop enough leaders fast enough, you're going to hire them all in from the outside, and that can be very distracting, or damaging is the word I'm looking for, very damaging to your culture if you've done some really good culture work.
And is that because there are people coming in with preconceived notions on how teams should be run or how meetings should go?
Even if you're really good at hiring to your values and you think they're a great fit, they're just still going to have their way of leading. They're still going to have their way of doing things. And if you have too much outside leadership pouring in, it just really does a number on all your intentional culture work that we talked about earlier.
So what if I'm listening to this, I'm hearing what you're saying, like, oh, I got to develop leaders. Let's say I'm in that, $1 million range or $3 million range, and I've got some product people, I've got some sales people, I've got some engineers. What are 2 or 3 specific things I could do over the next month that would be like an easy action to begin that process of developing those leaders? Are there really specific, tangible steps that you recommend to people?
Yeah, so I won't be self-serving and say, come to what we offer. We do that sort of thing, but there are some books that we learn from that I'll share. Some of them are just mindset things, like ways to think about yourself as a leader. One that I really like is Liz Wiseman, Multipliers. I don't know if you've heard of that one. That one's great. There's an organization out there called the Table Group. Patrick Lencioni, I don't know exactly how he pronounces it, but he wrote the book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And more recently, more recently, he wrote a book called The Advantage, which is just amazing. And then one other idea that I'll give to you is a group called the Arbinger Institute. And they wrote a book called Leadership and Self-Deception. There's kind of a personal leadership one called The Anatomy of Peace, but Leadership and Self-Deception and The Anatomy of Peace are really good. And more recently, they put one out called The Outward Mindset. So those are some of my favorite leadership resources. Of course, I already mentioned Jim Collins. I love all of his work around building a great, enduring company. So, books aren't the answer, but they're certainly part of the growth journey. And so going to seminars, going to events, reading books, talking about it actively as a team, choosing one thing that you're all going to work on together. There's just some, practical things you can do to make some progress in those areas.
That's really good. So I know we're coming up towards the top of the hour. You've been really generous with your time here, Brett. Like, what would be sort of your final message? How can people learn more about elite entrepreneurs? How can they get in touch with you? What's the best way for people to check out more of what you're doing now that you've shared a bunch of you said you don't really have this genius, but it sounds like you really do. So how can people learn more about what you guys are doing?
Well, so thanks for giving me the opportunity. I would say even our company name is Elite Entrepreneurs, plural. Our website, though, is simpler. It's Grow with Elite. So no spaces, no dashes, growwithelite.com. And maybe you can throw that in show notes or something. And then if anybody listening wants the infographic that we referenced several times, it's called The Stages of Small Business. All they have to do is text the word stages, 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 to 72,000. So 72000, and they'll have an opportunity to get that electronically and even watch a video of Clate teaching about it. So we've got a nice little resource for people if they want to see that You Are Here map in terms of their stages of small business growth.
Okay. So it's text. Dude, I just did it while you were talking. It works.
Okay. It worked today. Awesome.
That was cool. No, I mean, I'm sure it works every day, but I was just like, oh, now I'm getting notifications on my laptop and on my phone. I'm like,
Yeah.
7,200. Yeah, that's really easy. Stages.
72,000.
Picture, Clate.
Yep.
72,000. Yep. 72,000. And then reply yes to get 5 stages. Yep. So it's like a double opt in there. Cool.
Yeah.
Dude, this has been really, really good. It's really interesting to see the parallels of stuff I'm teaching to my, the tech sort of startup folks and people that you're talking with in your world. I'm so glad that we got put together by our mutual friend, Dan.
Yeah, me too. I'll have to thank him again. It's a great introduction.
Yeah, for sure. Well, look, we'll get all of these notes put down into a podcast episode. I'll share it out with you. You can share it with your group, and we'll definitely have to do this again sometime soon. Thanks so much for taking the time today.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise. All right, man. Thanks so much, Brett. All right, folks, that's a wrap. Thank you so much for listening to the Startup Selling Show, Talking Sales with Scott Sambucci. That's me. Again, as I mentioned at the start of today's episode, do make sure, if you haven't already, maybe you heard this in the beginning of the podcast, you say, oh yeah, I'm totally going to do that, and then you forgot already. Go over to Sales Qualia, salesqualia.com. And when you get to salesqualia.com, you can click a button that says Start Reading Now, where you can download an entire copy of my most recent book, Stop Hustling, Start Scaling. I want you to get a copy of this book because if you're listening to this podcast, chances are you need to stop hustling and start scaling. And this book will help you ramp up your repeatable revenue, give you a repeatable sales process so that you can scale your startup and make the impact that you want to make in your business. So that's it for now. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time, or, well, not see you. You'll hear us next time. And this is Scott Sambucci signing off.